everyone, we might make a start. Thanks for your patience and welcome this morning. I'm Josephine Brigginshaw and I'm the Engagement Manager at the Robin Boyd Foundation. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the East Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to also extend that respect to any First Nations people who are joining us this morning. So for those of you who are new to Walsh Street, which I think there are a few of you here today, the residence was designed by Australian modernist architect, author, critic and public educator Robin Boyd in 1957. Boyd used Walsh Street as an opportunity to design an experimental home for his family. As you will explore today, the residence consists of two open-plan pavilions that are unified by this beautiful glazed internal courtyard. Joining the pavilions is an innovative tension roof structure which is suspended between two I-beams, one at the rear of in the children's pavilion and one at the apex of the house above us. The master bedroom occupies the dramatic mezzanine upstairs and it doubles as a living and entertaining area. We really encourage you all to stay and explore the house further after the talk. And we have some of our wonderful volunteers, Corinna, Danuta and Sally, and also my colleague Jamie here today. So please seek us out if you have any questions. So without further ado, I'll hand over to our convener, Karen McCartney, to introduce Shelley and Zachary and let them get the conversation started. Thank you.
I just wanted to welcome everyone here today, and what a wonderful place, what a wonderful setting to be able to have this discussion where, you know, inventiveness and design come together, but also in this convivial way. And there's so many parallels with the Mud brand and the work that Shelley and Zachary have done together. I visited the studio to meet, I know Shelley, I've known Shelley for a long time, but to meet Zach and to talk about the nature of their collaboration. And it was really wonderful to see how craft, technology and design are being brought together in a completely unique way. So really today is a bit about unpicking that process and understanding some of the challenges and some of the delights of this very particular partnership. So the first question is, you know, so much in life is who you meet when, and collaborations can be, can start well and can go a bit pear-shaped, or they can start well and go wonderfully as yours has. How did you meet? How did you come together?
So I met Zach at a cult event at Design Week.
Yeah, Denver, I think.
Denver.
2018 or 19.
Yeah. And Zach had just designed a beautiful table that had won a prestigious award. And I think I had a chat with his mum and dad who are here today. And I just thought, what a clever young man, and wouldn't that be amazing to realise this sort of lighting range, which is, I've sort of been kicking around with lamps, trying to do something badly for a long time, and just made things for my own house that, you know, I think we've got some down in Stanmore Park, and but they're not resolved and they're not something that you could really sell. So that conversation started then, and it took us a little while to get beyond that.
Bit of a lull throughout COVID,
Yeah.
and then I think toward the tail end, I think we had our first call over a very patchy Wi-Fi connection.
Yeah.
Rocky start, but
Rocky start, but we got there. Yeah, and it's been lovely.
And how did you, was there a sense that, how did you know you could work together? Because, you know, you're leaping into this project. It has an element of risk. Did you ever have any, I don't want you to expose doubt, that's not the question, but, you know, what were the attributes that you felt that, from both sides, that you felt this would work?
I think for me, Zach is actually quite good friends now with my daughter, and there was sort of a little bit of conversation that was happening with my daughter and I around this project, and but I also know that he takes it all very seriously.
That's
you know,
important.
and I think that somebody who's seriously looked at what the work we had done to date, and was very respectful of the design aesthetic of mud.
Yeah, I don't think I was necessarily entirely confident that we could work together. I felt like I needed to go in there with an open mind and kind of prove to Shelley that I had an understanding of mud, and hopefully that understanding aligns with what Shelley saw of the brand. I think it's a bit different to other projects that I would go into, where I usually take a much more finalised idea straight into the client and work through it with them in that way. But yeah, I think my initial presentation to Mud didn't have any work, and we didn't get into that until a few meetings afterward. Yeah, just trying to, I think I started by trying to identify key themes and features that I saw in Mud and how that we could translate that into a lighting range.
But that's a very sensible approach, actually, to kind of come into it with a little bit of caution, you know, and an open mind about the materiality and the brand as well, because you've a very defined brand. But you know, you have collaborated in the past, and we talked a bit about that sliding scale of collaboration, where sometimes a collaboration is a marketing stamp, but this is a true collaboration. What would you want to talk a bit about? You know, that word is bandied about a lot. What does it mean to you?
I feel like it came up about 10 years ago, collaboration. It was, you know, before that maybe it was partnership or it was another word, but collaboration came up then. And you know, people would talk to me about doing collaborations, but really what they wanted to do was put their name on the back of something and sell it. And I've always felt that Mud could stand on its own 2 feet. It doesn't really need people's names associated with it. It needed to be the brand that could do that, and the longevity of the brand needed that.
Yes.
So we've had lots of invitations for different people with profiles to add their names to Mud, and that's one way of collaborating. The marketing one is really relevant, and more so with these current times where you want to introduce your product to a market that doesn't know your product, and you can do that with fashion designers. We did that with Lee Matthews. That was really great, and others, but there's not necessarily a lot of design crossover in that collaboration. It's more about brands coming together.
Yes.
But this is probably the first time we've truly collaborated with design, and I kind of feel a bit that they're Zach's lamps, less than mine. But we did go through, you know, a 3-year process of Zach learning about porcelain and me learning about his industrial design processes, and both of us learning about electrics and third-party supplies.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it was such a nice way to start, in that I think the first meeting that I had in person at Mud, Shelley took me through start to finish, like talking the literal powdered porcelain and where the tints are and how they bring them together and mix them, and then through to the pouring, and also mold making, and trimming, firing, through to the finished products. And that was such a nice way to start, to really be brought on board and given all that knowledge to work with from there.
But I mean, your practice is sort of defined by collaboration, isn't it? You know, with different.
Yes.
Has this been more similar to other collaborations, or has it had points of difference?
I think it's been a much deeper collaboration. Often in other projects that I've done, you don't get to work so closely with the manufacturer. So it's a real privilege to be able to do that, because I think it makes it a lot easier to resolve issues, and having that deeper understanding, I think you can get more interesting outcomes as well.
And I wanted to ask you, Shelley, like, why lighting? Because it does throw a little bit of complexity into, you know, you've got this brand that does, you know, wonderful ceramics, serving ware, vases, all sorts of things that are probably quite easy now that you've nailed the processes. So the idea of lighting, it is a complex one to bite off.
And I think lamps probably more so than the pendants that we've got in our range already. Why lighting? It's something that I needed. It's like I need lights. I mean, we all need lovely lights. And I think that conversations that I'd have with different companies that we've supplied, like Design Within Reach in the US, made a comment to me about, you know, that they loved what Mud does because it softens interiors. There's a lot of very masculine lighting options, but there's not very many that are a bit gentler, a bit softer, a bit more curved and organic. And I think that for me was something that I wanted to have in my own life. So, and that's really the theory of mud from the beginning. It's everything that I needed in my house. I assumed somebody else might need it in their house. So that's where it started, and that's where this started.
I think it also really highlights the beauty of the material. The play of light down different surfaces highlights the variations and the texture. So yeah, I mean, mud pieces already looked beautiful, but yeah, seeing like the inside play of light against a glazed surface or washing down the column of the table lamp, I think, yeah.
It is beautiful to see them in situ and upstairs, the way the colour works, and they're really lovely against these kind of matte walls. It looks very nice. But back to working with the material, did it surprise you how kind of mercurial it was as a material to work with?
I knew a fair bit about slip casting previously. There is a course at UTS that deals with slip casting within the Industrial Design degree, but what I didn't know was how porcelain has a memory, which I think is different to earthenware and terracotta. So if you're to overhandle or put too much water into the porcelain, the form, once it's out of the mould, it tends to remember that. And even if you can straighten that back up, and visually it looks like how it should look, once it comes out of the kiln, it's gone back into that form.
It's very contrary.
Is that right?
That's absolutely right. It just, it is, you have to have very light hands. And it's interesting, a lot of people come into mud to work with porcelain and they think that they can do it, that force the material to work, but you really have to, it takes a lot of time and a lot of training to get somebody to actually have, and a particular type of touch with the product to be able to get it from A to B.
And that's maybe what comes through that you're seeing in the final item, all that kind of subtlety of process. You know, it's not just press a button and these things spit out. You know, it's incredible.
I think there was also a part of the process that at the beginning I was a little bit nervous because I with the collaboration, it was gently telling Zach that we won't necessarily get a really super straight shade. You know, it would be lovely if we could make that happen every single time, but you're going to get there will be variations. And I think that's, you know, we'll be in business 30 years next year, and sort of the introduction of mud and then the explaining to people this is handmade, and then allowing it not to, so we didn't have to apologise for the handmade nature of the product. So, but breaking the news to Zach, that was kind of, that was different. And I could see his face going, but I really want a straight shade.
I didn't realise that. Obvious.
But there was a point, and over time, you know, we came to that point where, yep, that one will be, that is acceptable. This is where we get to, and this amount of bend or crease or drip in the glaze is okay. You know.
So during the development of the designs, was there a high attrition rate? Did lots of things fall by the wayside because they just didn't?
We've got some samples here.
Yes, because it was interesting to see Zach's first cardboard iteration.
Of this lamp.
Yeah. You can see how true it is. Yeah.
So from there we went to a 3D printed version, which was like this. And at the underside you can see there is nothing. And that was one of the things we had to change.
And also that's just been carved out for cable ducting, which we didn't have originally. Yeah.
And then we tried working with yellow, but yellow is the worst colour to work with. So each porcelain is tricky, but then you add pigment to it. The amount of pigment that goes into a yellow piece is excessive to get that kind of bright pop of colour. We have to put a lot of colour in. And then the clay itself kind of turns to jelly. So you don't know how thick a piece is you can't control the waves and the movement of it. And then we decided we weren't going to do yellow.
So it's
it
the
also
only
cracks
yellow. Is this a
more.
collectible yellow piece? Is the only yellow?
It's the one. It's the one, and it's got a really special crack in it.
Yeah, 2 cracks in there.
Yeah.
We did it, but this one was actually fired on its head, so it was fired upside down, which kept this nice and round. And then when we tried to fire it the right way up, it was a disaster.
I don't remember what happened to that one. But you generally can't fire on an edge, is that?
No.
Yeah. So we then introduced a base to them. So now they have a base for firing.
Yeah.
And
so
you can see here, there's an
we
additional
changed.
wall in there to help prevent any of the cracking. So putting a radius in there helps
It does
relieve
look beautifully
any stress.
resolved when you see the stages, you know, and you work through each thing. It's quite amazing how, you know, you look at the cardboard and you think, yes, that's ostensibly the same, but actually all those things have been resolved. And that's, I guess, the proper design process at work.
I mean, there are 2 other key people that were essential in this process, which was Pat, who works in our studio in Marrickville, and he had to own this project to get it from the beginning to the end. And Somchai Charon, who makes our beautiful moulds for us. And every time we go, Somchai, we need another one. We want to do this now. And he's like, oh, yes, okay. Very gently, very quietly, we just get it done really quickly for us.
So this one's a 3-piece mold.
Yeah. Quite complicated. It has pieces of silicone to resist the porcelain adhering, and it's, probably the last to be, will be the last one to be released in production, because there's still a few little tweaks of that Somchai's working through. But
So you see, when I think people see the words handmade, they have no idea what handmade actually means. I don't think I did. You know, that it's incredibly complex to produce something that looks quite simple and elegant.
And also a handmade slip cast does sort of has, people think slip cast is not handmade because hand thrown is handmade. But slip cast is working with your hands, and you have the support of a mould, but everything else, every other part of the process, it's in, I mean, Zach's watched the whole process and knows how incredibly handmade these pieces are.
And you're so vulnerable, you know, it's got to be fired, it's got to have, there's so many elements that can go wrong to get to that kind of very resolved end point. So is it frustrating sometimes? Or have you learnt to kind of go with the flow over the years?
I think if I can't see a resolve, then it's frustrating, but usually I can see what's going on. We had one moment with the shades where I didn't know what was going on, and Pat came up with a solution which was fantastic. He actually sanded back the kiln shells to allow because everything shrinks through the firing process. So it has to shrink, so it's dragging across the surface, and every time it drags across the surface it will change shape, so you'll get different. And we need the top to be round, particularly in this little guy. Has to
Which
be
is
very
why
round.
we tried to move away from having an edge on the kiln
Yes.
shelf.
And partly, I mean, the light is gorgeous with the curve at the top, but it's essential for the firing process to allow the pieces to shrink. So Pat took the kiln shelves and polished them. He sanded them back and made them really smooth so that it was an easier process for the pieces to actually shrink in the firing.
And so did you find that within the staff, within the business, in taking on this new project, they rose to the challenge?
Absolutely.
Was that quite
They're
a
amazing.
lovely feeling
Yeah.
that they were able to do
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's so many people are involved in this project. It's, you know, Tess, our general manager, is also an industrial designer by trade, and she's worked with Zach and I tirelessly in keeping us on track and giving us timelines and making sure that the third-party products are arriving, and who is that person, where's that coming from. But the other thing that's really lovely is this is not just, it's not just the light. It's like, how do we take this to market? So, you know, all of a sudden Zach and Tess start talking about the packaging, and I thought, this is not just something for us to resolve as a company. Zach's involved in that process. And how do we get this to market? How do we make it look really smart when somebody's spent X amount of dollars to purchase a lamp? It needs to look professionally packed, but we need it to be recyclable. We don't want any plastics. Challenges.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you have referred a few times to third-party suppliers with a bit of a smirk. And I just, you know, with technology and porcelain, it's kind of unlikely bedfellows in some ways. What have been the challenges of bringing those two elements together?
I would say generally the goal in industrial design is standardization of components so that you can make thousands of them efficiently and achieve economies of scale to bring costs down. But with that comes exacting dimensions, and that's not at all what you get in these products. So really we had to come up with creative ways to allow these, all the frames and the inserts going inside of the lamps to respond to a varying envelope. So within the pop lamp, we've done that by having a rubber component that slides in, and it's got kind of flanges on it, a bit like fitting a lid into a glass jar with a little rubber seal. So there's a series of those that hold it in there, and then inserted into that is the internal plastic component that houses the circuit board, battery, light, and switch. For the table lamp, we came up with almost like a tripod style frame where each limb was sprung. So they're all angled outward, and then to assemble it, you gather them, squeeze them in, put it in, and they expand outward until wherever they make contact with the lamp. And it also, having these three different prongs also gives us a little bit of maneuverability that we can bend them ourselves to best fit the lamp when we're assembling each individual piece. It's a bit more complicated on this one. The bottom's fine, just sits there by gravity. The top,
but the bottom is not the first iteration.
No, we have changed it. Originally we had a light in the base as well to give some illumination and uplighting, but having seen it in person, we decided, one, it was extra cost, extra complexity, but also just didn't really work in terms of a visual.
I mean, it was sort of 8 weeks that we turned that new base around, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was really quick.
Yes,
And
because
it's
the
so
thinking was
successful. I
already
love
to
the
a
base.
certain stage.
Yeah, I'm very happy with the base too.
Yeah.
And also a key feature of the standing lamp is that you can tilt the top, but you can also tilt the pole to give you a cantilevered lighting over a table or chair.
I mean, that aspect really amazed me, because I sort of, if I were you, I would think, do I take on that whole extra element? So it's fantastic that has.
But I think
I didn't
where
even
we
think about it.
where we
It was great.
arrived with the new base, I think it's really lovely because you have an elongated slot on the top that gives you an affordance to realise that something does move here, and we can tilt this whole element.
Yeah.
And obviously this is part of an extended, Mud brand, and you don't tend to discontinue things, do you? You kind of, once things come in, they're there. So there's got to be tremendous rigour in getting them there, because you live with them for a very long time.
We do, and we need to know that we can produce them, and I think that that's sort of been the challenge. Well, I can't even think when we started prototyping, how long ago these came out, but we were hoping that we were launching and be able to have them all in stores next week and all of that, but there's, it's just been a little bit longer, and we want them to be excellent. We don't want them to be okay, So there's a little bit more tweaking that we need to do, and I think it's that thing of, we would love all of our suppliers to be local, so at least we could go to their factories. We've found a new factory to do the wire inserts for the flared table lamp, and
so that's locally in Melbourne.
In Melbourne, but when it comes to electrics, we don't have that here.
I just don't think that you can get someone in Australia to do this. No. Or we did speak to someone, but this would sell for maybe $1,200 if we worked with them.
Yeah. So it's it's all about price and
yes.
making sure that we're in the right price within the market.
Yes.
Yeah. And sitting
yes, with where your consumer already sits. Yes.
Yeah.
It can be a leap because it is a different type of product, but not way off kilter in terms of pricing and positioning.
But we want we want people to be able to purchase them.
Yes, exactly. And also, you're a carbon neutral company. So how did you approach sustainability within the process?
Well, The porcelain we know what to do with. And for end of life, we've got lots of avenues that we take the product to, or pieces that don't make it through the process. So we have our second sale, we have a terrazzo that we've been working with for a while, and we've got a few other projects that I can't speak about yet, but are coming up, which are going to be exciting. And through our process, we recycle everything pretty much. But then end of life, we wanted to work with products that could be recycled. So the smallest amount of plastic that we could get away with.
Yeah, some aspects of it are really guided by physical constraints of what it needs to be. So I think it'd be quite hard to do this with anything other than plastic. And I think you'll see that in pretty much every other portable light that you come across is predominantly plastic. But there may be possibilities down the road of using recycled polypropylene and things like that.
These also can be replaced, so if something was faulty, you could just get a new insert for the interior, so you're not throwing away the entire thing you've got.
Yeah, all of this has been thought about with design for disassembly, so we're not bonding things together, so that if one part fails, it's very easy to swap that over rather than having to get rid of the whole product. And also end of life, it's a lot easier to separate materials and be able to recycle them rather than have something that is built up of 5 or 10 different pieces. And then on these lamps, trying to just use metal as much as possible rather than plastic, as it can come from recycled sources and it can be onward recycled from there.
And what about the international market? I mean, you already sell in the States, and how many countries are you in?
So we sell to lots of different countries, but we have our own stores in the UK and the US and local. So we have lighting, cord companies that will provide the correct components to sell these into those countries as well.
So you'll launch them in
I think we'll
the
probably
States
do so. I'm not sure about a launch for the US, but definitely in the UK, because we've just opened a new store in Marylebone. We're going to sort of do something in September for their design week.
Oh, that's a great spot, Marylebone. That's excellent, yes. And you touched on packaging earlier, and when I was in to see you, I know it's a work in progress, but what you were looking at was really beautiful but also functional, and that idea that when someone receives something from mud, it is the whole, the consideration of the whole. Can you talk a bit about your approach to that packaging solution?
So first of all, the first thing I think of is we have, I think, is it 19 boxes, Tess, that we have? 19 boxes. So we have 19 boxes. And is there are any of those boxes we can use for this project? And the first thing we found was that we have one box that works perfectly for pop, size-wise, but it needed something. So Zach very quickly found a beautiful little insert.
Yeah, so the box is a fair bit larger. It's suitable for the height, but there's a bit more width to it because I imagine it usually houses some bowl or vase or pendant, I think. But yeah, working with cardboard again, just to create 2 different folded pieces that slot into the box with a central hole, a few little cutouts to give it a bit of tolerance, and it just slides neatly into that. And it's quite nice in the unboxing experience because when you open it up, this is supported by a piece of cardboard, but you see this whole top part and can very easily slide it out.
You had a lovely quote that you find good people find each other and don't let go. Do you think that's serving you well?
Oh my God, that sort of makes me tear up a bit because I feel like there's so many amazing people that have joined the journey that I've been on with mud for over the last 30 years. I have one employee that is about to hit 20 years of employment, and that's extraordinary. And right down to family members that have been sort of on the path with me for a long time. Somchai Charon, who makes our moulds, I met when I was pregnant with my son, who's 22 now, so he's been in my life for a really long time. And I think that, it creates that family environment. There's probably 120 people that work at Mud now, sort of globally. There's, people working in the stores. But they're all valued, and I want them all to stick around for a long time, We get so much more when we're
Of course.
together for longer. Yeah.
It's business success, isn't it? when you
But we are part of their journey, not
Yes.
all of it, and they should go when they want
Yes,
to
when
and
they're
come
ready
back
to.
when they want to. Yeah.
And would you have more, I know it's maybe early days in that you haven't got this particular baby launched yet, but would you work together again?
I think we already have. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Here's the question too. But we have worked on other things actually. We've redesigned the sconce backing for the existing
Right.
mud sconce, and also some more technical things for architects who are wanting to specify the pendant lining. So pulling together documentation on that, I've been working on as well.
Which is fantastic. It's really about, probably letting the dust settle a little bit
Yes.
after this, getting this into production, and then having a think about anything else that it needs to be, we don't want to make something just to make something, just to have a new thing. I got stuck in the trade show every 6 months, had to come up with a new idea, a new colour, and it was quite chaotic and quite hard. And I think that the consumer at the end of the day wants consistency in what they're purchasing, and we try to do that, and a great retail experience, which we try to do as well. So I think there will be another project.
Well, Zach now
It's a
has
given.
this tremendous knowledge now
Absolutely.
about the material, the bringing together of technology and porcelain, so it would, at some point it will emerge.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We do have lots of designs up our sleeve.
We do.
Waiting in the
we
wings.
do. From the
Extensive-
beginning.
Yeah,
extensive
We had,
initial
there were so
concept
many.
phase.
There were so many great ideas that came out. We really had to go, what are our favourites in this? So maybe it's more lights, maybe it's something else.
Lovely. Well, thank you both so much. It was a wonderful explanation. I think it made clear to everyone the process, the outcomes, the difficulties, and the beautiful, beautiful results. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Karen.
Yeah. But if any